Hey everyone, and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 75, May the 17th, Tuesday, 2017. Well, the last 24 hours, not a whole lot going on TowerGate. I do have a couple items. Obviously, the most important story, the biggest story that's been all over the, certainly all over the talk radio today and all over the alternative media is, of course, the reemergence of the Seth Rich situation, which we'll get into in just a moment. First, a couple things on TowerGate. Let's see. We have, in the past 24 hours, we've learned that Judicial Watch, which is, I assume, Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch, has now sued for records on the Dossier. So, of course, we did a video about 2 weeks ago on the Dossier, where I took you through the entire two videos, which we went through the entire timeline of the Dossier, how it began, how it was born, and how it ended up with BuzzFeed. We talked about a lot of the people involved in the Dossier, the sources, and of course how it all came together. But it looks like that Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch believes there is still more to learn. I would certainly like to know who leaked it to BuzzFeed. I think that's a very important question, and I don't know if he'll get that kind of information, but you never know what you'll learn. It does take some time to get these documents. Once you do the Freedom of Information request, it can take up to a year to get these types of documents, but I think that they'll find it easier going with the Trump administration and the current FBI and the current State Department than they would have under the Obama administration, which was like pulling teeth getting FOIA request documents from Obama. But I think it might be a little easier under Trump, especially regarding the Dossier, because I think that Trump would love to see as many people as possible looking at that Dossier, talking about it, asking questions, and looking into it. So good job for Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch. We'll see what he turns up. Next, we have a story I talked about a little bit yesterday. It was kind of breaking yesterday at this time. Now it's all over the alternative media. Again, you'll never find it anywhere on CNN, MSNBC, or anywhere like that. But more sources now reporting, and I found two more sources connected with the site teaparty.org, which is usually a pretty mainstream Republican site. I believe it's run by that woman who kind of founded the Tea Party. And usually it's pretty mainstream type stuff that you find on teaparty.org, but they're actually talking about this issue we talked about yesterday with Susan Rice, now having her attorneys contacting the Justice Department or the FBI, I'm not sure which, but she is contacting the authorities to try to figure out how she can get immunity. She's looking for immunity. And, you know, she knows that, Susan Rice knows that her unmasking was illegal. There's no question about that. We know that the unmasking was based on the information that came from the FISA warrant, which was based on a hoax. And so if all of that surveillance and all of that unmasking occurred based on a hoax, it was illegal. And even if the FISA warrant was based on something factual, still the fact that she was unmasking, and then again we talked a little bit about the unmasking process yesterday. According to Admiral Rogers, when someone requests unmasking, it's very, very specific. Only that individual gets to see, and they are told not to share it with anyone else. At the very least, Susan Rice broke protocol and probably broke the law as well. So Susan Rice, it appears, both teaparty.org, Freedom Outpost, and several other sites now starting to pick up the same information that Susan Rice's attorneys are seeking some sort of an immunity deal. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll keep watching that. Eventually that will find its way into the mainstream, because you cannot really keep something like that silent. So anyway, I expect that we'll hear more about that. So anyway, let's get to the big story of the day, which is, of course, Seth Rich. For those of you who do not know, I actually started this YouTube channel based on the Seth Rich murder that occurred back on July the 10th of 2016. And what happened was I was like everyone else looking at the Seth Rich situation. I smelled a rat, something didn't add up, so I did 2 videos. And it was really my intention just to do those 2 videos and maybe do a follow-up video on Seth Rich. I never really intended to go on and do more political analysis and stuff like that. It just, we were in the middle of an election season. There was things to talk about, and I was compelled to do so. So I just started making the videos, and the next thing you know, we have the Donald Trump tweeting out that, he thought he was under surveillance, and that really got my ears perked up. So I started doing the TowerGate videos, and so this is how it all kind of played itself out. But it all actually began with the Seth Rich. I did 2 videos, not terribly entertaining but extremely informative. I did Seth Rich murder part 1, Seth Rich murder part 2. The second video is over an hour long. I think it's like an hour and 6 minutes, and it's again, it's not terribly entertaining, but I did about 3 weeks worth of research on that. I had about 10 pages of handwritten notes on that, and I basically lay out everything that we know about what happened to Seth Rich, and I start from the afternoon of the day he was murdered all the way up until the time of his murder. So I lay out the entire timeline. I also go digging pretty deeply into what Seth Rich was working on at the DNC. He was the director of voter expansion data. He was working on quite a few different programs, and I actually discovered through my research that some of these things he was working on were very closely connected to the Clintons. These were research programs that were created by the Clinton machine, and he was working on some of those programs. And essentially what Seth Rich was working and spending a lot of time on was looking at issues with voters, people being denied voting. And so anyhow, I go into a lot of detail there, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, you might want to take a look at my Seth Rich. In fact, I think you could probably just type into the Google or YouTube search box, just type in Seth Rich murder part 2. I'm sure it'll pop right up for you. So it's not terribly entertaining video, but it's extremely information intensive. I did quite an investigation into that, quite a bit of research, and I really go into some very good detail. And the link, what I found that was interesting when I started looking into Seth Rich was when I found the links, the very close links to Seth Rich and the Clintons. Because you never really hear much about Seth Rich and the Clintons. You hear about Seth Rich, he worked at the DNC, he may have been a Bernie Sanders supporter, he may have been disgruntled because of Bernie was being cheated. You hear all these sorts of things, but no one ever really tied a connection, as far as I could see, to the Clintons. But if you watch that video, you'll see where I tie Seth Rich very closely to the Clintons. And while I was never able to be for sure that Seth Rich ever met Bill or Hillary Clinton, I certainly proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was very close friends with several people who were good friends of the Clintons. So Seth Rich was friends with some people who were very good friends with the Clintons, and so I tie those connections together. I look at the timeline, I look at the police report, I look at a lot of different things. And I do a pretty extensive video there. So anyway, what's happening today with Seth Rich is that here about 24 hours ago, people began tweeting and putting up YouTube videos and doing stories in the alternative media about the fact that the Seth Rich family, allegedly, we're not 100% sure, but it appears that the family of Seth Rich, his mother, his father, and possibly his brother as well, he has a younger brother, have retained a private detective who is a former Washington, D.C. homicide detective who has friends who are in the federal police of some sort, maybe FBI or what have you. He's also got friends still in the Washington Metro Police Department, detectives who he worked with before he retired and became a PI. And he's disclosed some extraordinary information. The 2 most important things he's disclosed are tens of thousands of documents that Seth Rich, via attachments, sent to WikiLeaks. He also is alleged to have passed on personally, physically, documents to a third party who then passed them on to Julian Assange. This man apparently has passed away, if you know what I mean. But this is a major revelation. He also says that according to his friend, who's a federal law enforcement officer of some type, I don't know exactly if he's FBI or what he is, but this detective, this private detective, has a friend who's a federal police officer of some sort, and he's familiar with the case. And he says that James Comey and the FBI possess the laptop that Seth Rich was known to carry around with him everywhere he went, and that on that laptop is the evidence that he communicated directly with WikiLeaks many, many times, including many emails and many attachments. Attachments would mean documents, things like that. So this ties Seth Rich directly to the WikiLeaks story. And we've suspected this for a long time, but Julian Assange would never come out and say, yeah, he was my source. But certainly he made that comment when he was being interviewed on Dutch TV. Then, of course, Megyn Kelly had him on for 2 nights. Sean Hannity had him on both on TV and radio. And he dances around that Assange will not really give up his source, but he does just about everything short of come out and say that Seth Rich was his leaker. He's got a reward out. And what was interesting about yesterday was that after this started coming out about the family allegedly hiring a private detective, Julian Assange retweeted that. He retweeted that. So for some reason, Julian Assange is very much fascinated with the Seth Rich investigation. And it just leaves you more and more to believe that Seth Rich was the DNC leaker. This is exactly the conclusion I came to when I looked into it myself. I've never believed that the Russians hacked the DNC. But the reason this is so important is because if we can prove, and I think there's overwhelming evidence to prove this, but this would need to actually be done through legal channels, official channels. If you can prove that Seth Rich was the one who leaked the DNC emails, that blows the entire Russia hacked the DNC theory completely out of the water. And once you blow the Russia hacked the DNC completely out of the water, the entire Russia narrative disappears. It's just destroyed. It goes away, which we all know it's a farce anyway. But this really puts it to bed. So obviously, another thing that this detective is stating, and he said this to Sean Hannity on the radio. I listened to it. And if you haven't heard it, you can probably YouTube it. I heard it live myself. So anyway, he told Sean Hannity that he has a friend in law enforcement in the Washington, D.C. Metro PD who told him in no uncertain terms that they were told to stand down, not to pursue this whatsoever. This whole investigation was clamped down on from day one. So it's a major cover-up, and it shouldn't surprise us to learn that James Comey has got Seth Rich's laptop there, and that James Comey knew that Seth Rich had communicated directly to WikiLeaks, and not just a few times, but hundreds of times, and had passed thousands and thousands of documents via attachments to WikiLeaks directly. And it's also believed that he passed, using a third party, physically passed documents as well. So if James Comey knew every bit of this, you would think that James Comey would have done some sort of an investigation. At that point, if you've got Seth Rich, and James Comey knows from doing the analysis on his laptop computer that he has been involved with emailing, communicating with, sending documents to WikiLeaks, then James Comey should never have gone to the DNC and asked them to look at their servers. James Comey should have went and got a warrant and went right to the DNC and confiscated those servers. That's exactly what the FBI would normally do. They generally wouldn't call you and ask. They would get a warrant and come take your servers, and they would go back and give them to the analyst who would do a forensic examination of them, and they would pull them hard drives, and they would find out exactly what is on those hard drives. And apparently James Comey already knows that on Seth Rich's computer is information or evidence rather, that Seth Rich did communicate directly with WikiLeaks, and he sent documents to WikiLeaks. So this is another thing that James Comey has obviously been hiding. and playing gatekeeper. Fortunately, he is gone. But now that he is gone, and once we get a new FBI director, it will be very interesting to see if, in fact, they reopen this investigation, the FBI, because I'm pretty sure it's been sealed up in Washington, D.C., the Metro Police. I'm pretty sure they've been taken care of. In fact, the police chief who was there at the time when this all went down has since been promoted and given a good paying federal job. So she was obviously taken care of. It was a female police chief. She's obviously been taken care of, and everyone else on the force, the detectives, there were 2 detectives assigned to the case. At the time I was doing my research, I contacted them by email. They never responded to my emails. So anyway, this looks like it's the major breaking news today. I was pretty amazed, to flip through the AM radio dial today as I was working. We have a little radio there. I was flipping through it, and everyone hit the story from Limbaugh, Brian Kilmeade. Hannity spent about an hour on it, and even interviewed this detective who's alleged to be working for the Seth Rich family. Let's see, you had Larry Elder. I mean, the entire, if you just, like, there's a station you can listen to where I live. It's nothing but AM talk radio. Excuse me. Mostly your type, conservative type, mainstream conservative talk shows, from Limbaugh to Hannity and Kilmeade and all these guys. And I assume Mark Levin is probably hitting it very hard this evening. I'm not listening to it. It would be on right now, but I'm not listening to Levin. But I'm sure Levin will be hitting this very hard. So the fact that this really, in 24 hours, was able to find its way into the mainstream of talk radio, that's important, because talk radio has a huge audience amongst Republicans, conservatives, and the more mainstream type conservatives. I'm not really one of those people per se, but I do occasionally listen to it. So anyway, the Seth Rich story is really big, and when it all went down, there wasn't a lot of people, say Republicans in Congress or people like that, wanting to have hearings about it or putting pressure on the police in the Washington Metro D.C. area, or even the FBI. In fact, most people, I didn't even know that the FBI was even involved in the Seth Rich murder. I thought it was a local murder being handled by the local Washington Metro Police. I didn't even know that the FBI was involved in the Seth Rich murder. But apparently they've been involved in covering it up and helping to cover up. So anyway, this is bombshell information. The fact that Comey and the FBI have had and have known for a long time, since the day after the murder, in fact, 10 months, they have known that Seth Rich communicated with Julian Assange. And it's funny because during the last 10 months, there's been many people talk about this. Assange has been interviewed on mainstream media outlets. You have mainstream people talking about it. But for some reason, James Comey never dawned on him to do a little investigation, to maybe look into the fact that, what anyone else would think is, wait a minute, here's this guy, works at the DNC. He is murdered. 12 days later, all these documents from the DNC come out. And if you're James Comey, you find out that Seth Rich was communicating with and sending documents to WikiLeaks. And that doesn't make you want to at least be a little curious as to whether or not there may be some collusion between Seth Rich and Julian Assange, and if maybe it's a possibility that he was the leaker. And if he was the leaker, as John Podesta said in one of his emails, we should find the leaker and make them pay. So, again, Comey had to be a gatekeeper. There's absolutely no way that Comey could be that incompetent or that unaware of what was going on around him. There's just no way that you could be the FBI director and have all this information, not just Seth Rich, but everything else, and seemingly have it, not even make you the slightest bit curious as to wanting to look into it. It's just not believable. It's extraordinary. So this is the major story breaking today. I will be interested now to see if any members of Congress pick up on it, include it into the Russia hearings, because if we're having these hearings, and all these hearings are based on, Trump-Russia collusion, the Russians hacking into the DNC and the election, if we bring the Seth Rich situation into play, And we say, wait a minute, now we have another situation here. We have proof that Seth Rich may have been the one who actually leaked the DNC emails and all the other documents to Julian Assange, which means it proves, or at least ways, it relieves Russia of being the ones who may have been responsible. It at least ways allows for the possibility that it was Seth Rich. Doesn't mean maybe the Russians didn't have something to do with it as well. I doubt that. But you could certainly make the case now that it's more likely that it was Seth Rich leaking that information to WikiLeaks than it was the Russians hacking and giving it to Julian Assange, especially since Assange has come out and said, hey, I can tell you right now, I can't tell you, I won't disclose my sources, but I will tell you it was not the Russians. And while Julian Assange may be accused of many things, you cannot accuse him at this point of being a liar. He's never been proven to being a liar, and his information he publishes at WikiLeaks is highly, highly accurate. They rarely, if ever, get anything wrong. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see now that we are in a different situation than we were last July when this went down. Be interesting to see if any members on these two committees will interject this new variable into the equation, the Seth Rich possibly being the person who leaked the stuff to WikiLeaks, as opposed to the what they've been dealing with, which is working from the idea that it was the Russians who hacked the DNC. What if we now change the narrative, and if the narrative now becomes no, the Russians didn't hack the DNC, after all it was Seth Rich, and he leaked the information to WikiLeaks, and then he comes up dead. This takes things to an extraordinary new crazy level, and be very interesting to see if Republicans on those either of those two committees, House and Senate, have the stomach to go down this particular rabbit hole, because this rabbit hole is a deep, dark rabbit hole, and you stick your head down this rabbit hole, you never know what is waiting down there for you to bite your head off. But Seth Rich is now pushing up daisies, unfortunately, and the man who he apparently passed the documents to, who gave them to Julian Assange, stepped in front of a train and met his demise. And of course, we all understand, what happened to Michael Hastings. So hopefully, hopefully this private investigator working for the Rich family, if in fact that's what is happening, hopefully he does not drive a Mercedes with the same system Michael Hastings had in his car, because he might also find himself having an accident, or maybe he'll be shot in a failed robbery or something, or step in front of a train. You never know. When you get pretty close to the Clintons, and you get pretty close to certain things about the Clintons, bad things have a tendency to happen to you. So this again throws another major wrench into the spokes of this entire Russia investigation. It revigorates the Seth Rich thing, because I think what's happened now is that Seth Rich's parents, because when I did my video back in July of last year, at that time Seth Rich's parents were not happy about people like me making videos suggesting there was some foul play involved in regard to the DNC or what have you. They apparently had made statements, or had their PR person making statements on their behalf, that they weren't happy with the so-called conspiracy theorist. But I think that what has happened is that Seth Rich's parents, obviously it was their son who was killed, I think that they have not been getting any answers to their questions. The crime is still unsolved. There's never been a single witness at this point. There's never been a single person who's been brought in for questioning. They have no leads. They have no suspects. They have nothing. And I think it's pretty hard, if you're the Rich family, to be almost a year removed from that and have the police tell you that, yeah, they're really working on this, but they just haven't turned up anything. It's just hard to believe that, even we have a murder here in my local town, it don't take them long to solve it. There's not too many unsolved murders in my city. When someone is killed, and it doesn't happen often, we have maybe a couple dozen murders a year, they usually have it figured out within a couple hours. At the most a couple days, maybe a few weeks. Every now and then we'll get a really unsolved murder, but they usually get pretty damn close to the bottom of it. They at least have suspects. They at least have brought people in and questioned them. They have people they're looking at or watching. In the case of Seth Rich, it's nothing, man. It's crickets. They have nothing. So it's hard to believe you could do all this investigation and have absolutely no suspects, have absolutely no one that you've brought in for questioning, have no clues, have no tips, have nothing. There's reward money out there. We had 25 traffic cameras pointed at that intersection. As I state in my video, it was hard to me to imagine anybody entering and exiting that crime scene without coming up on one of those surveillance cameras. They're all over the place at that particular corner and all along the 2 or 3 blocks around that corner. How someone got into the crime scene, committed the crime, and left the crime scene is hard for me to understand. The fact that Seth Rich was involved in physical combat with his attackers, yet they found absolutely zero DNA, is hard for me to believe. He had cuts and scratches and bruises on his hands, knees, head, and face. How you can engage in physical combat with someone and have them not leave some DNA behind is, in this age of science that we live in, is very hard for me to believe. Along with just a normal theory that we're being given that it was a failed robbery. I mean, if you're going to go to the fact that you've got a gun, the guy that you're robbing does not have a gun, the fact that you put a gun in his face or in his back, said, give me all your money, the fact that you even have to pull the trigger is extraordinary. Most people just, someone puts a gun in my face or in my back, I'm going to give them what they want. Wallet, watch, phone, whatever they want. Take it, dude. It's all yours. Just don't shoot me. You know. But in this case, they shoot Seth Rich in the back twice, it appears. But they don't take his money. They don't take his laptop. They don't take his cell phone. They don't take anything. It just it doesn't work for me. And this is what I conclude in my video. So this is very interesting, and we'll just have to watch and see how this plays into the overall narrative of the Russian hacking and everything else that's going on. It's just things are getting really, really crazy, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not members of Congress want to bring this new variable into the equation in their hearings, and whether or not how long it will take before MSNBC, CNN, and all these other networks, how long it will take before they finally have to cover the story, because it's all over the internet. I'm sure all of you who, if you spent any time at all on the internet, it was just almost every, when I pulled up my YouTube page this morning, almost every video that was in my playlist was Seth Rich. So anyhow, it's major breaking story. It has a very big impact on the overall story that we're following, and this thing is just so crazy that we'll just have to keep watching it and see where it all goes. It's fascinating. It's unfortunate because we are talking about the death of Seth Rich. It's a sad thing, and I do feel bad for his parents and his brother and his family, or his friends and other people. He seemed like a pretty good guy, but it's something we have to follow, and we just have to keep watching. So anyway, I appreciate you guys tuning in and subscribing to my channel, and we'll keep working on it, and we'll just keep watching this thing play out, and watching as the shoes drop. It seems like almost every day there's a little bit more, so we'll just keep following it and see where it leads. So you guys have a good night. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.